Hi guys, and welcome back to Drive to School Chat, where we discuss a subtopic in geography on the way to school. Now today, I'd like us to talk about the UK's population density, urban cores, and the rural periphery. Now we are doing that under the umbrella of UK's evolving human landscape. And when we are talking about human landscape here, or human geography for that matter, we are talking about how and where people live. So we are talking about population, we are talking about culture, and we are talking about the economics of it as well. So the economy, so things to do with income and so on. So the first thing then that I'd like us to begin with is a number of questions that I'd like you to be able to answer by the end of this particular Drive to School chat. And the first one is, what is population density? The second question is, why does it vary across the UK? And then thirdly, I'd like you to be able to explain the characteristics of urban cores and the rural periphery. And then fourthly, how those characteristics of urban cores and rural periphery impact on the way people live. Okay, so let's get started then. And we are going to start off with population density. Now, population density refers to the number of people in an area. Now, the area obviously is defined, and in a lot of cases, it's defined in kilometers squared or square kilometers. Now, that will then tell us whether a place is crowded or not, because if we are looking at the number of people, then we calculate that by dividing the population of that particular area, so the number of people in that particular area, by the area itself. So what area are they living in? And then we get the number of people in that particular area per square kilometer. Now, that then means that we have places that are sparsely populated, so do not have as many people living in them. And then we also have places that are densely populated. So for example, if we are talking about some of the towns and cities in the UK, they are likely to have over 1,000 people living in every square kilometer. So we would consider that to be densely populated. And then if we are talking about rural areas in the UK, so the rural periphery, so villages and so on, you could have places where you have less than 10 people living per square kilometer. So those places are considered to be sparsely populated. Now, if we look at the map of the UK, we can see that the population density of the UK varies. And looking closely at the map, we can see that the towns and the cities here in the UK tend to have very high population densities. And then the areas that are further away from those towns and cities have a low population density. So if we look around London, for example, high population density there. If we look at places like Manchester, like Liverpool, like Newcastle, and so on. So the major towns and cities of the UK will have high population density, and then the rural areas will have low population density. So those areas that are towns and cities then are referred to as the urban core, or urban cores, if you like. Then the rural areas that have a sparse population, or yes, they have a low population density rather, are referred to as the rural periphery. Okay, let's then move on to urban cores. So what are the characteristics of the urban cores? Now, we have said that these urban cores are the large towns and cities such as Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham, London, and so on. Now, these tend to be the centers of economic activity. And because they are the centers of economic activity, they drive the UK economy, or they drive the GDP of the UK. Now, what are some of their characteristics then? So they have a lot of job opportunities. Now, if they have a lot of job opportunities, then that implies that they are likely to have a higher population as people migrate from other parts of the UK to these urban cores to take up those jobs. And it's not only people that are coming from other parts of the UK. We will also have international migration, especially to the larger towns, like the larger cities rather, like London and Birmingham. And that's because there are particular sectors of the economy where we may have shortages and where there is a need for specialized workers. Also, people who are in specialisms that may not be properly or adequately resourced here in the UK. So, for example, we have heard recently of the government bringing in people in the medical profession, so doctors and nurses from other countries. And this is because there aren't enough doctors and nurses that are being produced locally. So that then would be an example of a specialism where the government is employing from outside the UK. And a lot of those migrants are likely to go into those large towns and cities or the urban cores. Right. So job opportunities is one of them. Now, we'll give a very quick example here of London. Now, London, due to the number of jobs it has, generates between 22 and 25% of the UK's GDP. Now, that is a really significant amount of GDP being generated in just one city. That implies that London is a very important city in the UK if it is actually generating a quarter of the country's GDP. And we know that London is a world city. So a world city being a city that has influence economically, politically, and environmentally across the world. Now, London is not just a world city, though. London is also what is referred to as a primate city. And a primate city is one that has double the population, or more than double the population, of the second largest city in a particular country. And we know that the second largest city in the UK is Birmingham. Now, Birmingham has a population of 2.7 million people, while London in 2025, so the current figures show that London has a population of 9.84 million people. Now, a lot of that population in London has been brought about by international migration. In fact, London's growth since 2024 has been 0.96%. And that growth is mainly due to international migration. So London is a world city and is also a primate city. Now, we also need to mention here that we have another 5 cities in the north of the UK that are seen to be economic drivers of the UK's GDP as well. And they are referred to as the Northern Powerhouse. Now, that includes cities such as Liverpool, Manchester, Bradford, Leeds, and Sheffield. Now, those cities are centers of innovation and economic growth. And as a result of that, in combination, or as a group of 5 cities, they also generate a significant amount of the UK's GDP. So those 5 cities, or that Northern Powerhouse, is very important for our specification and is something that you may be asked about in the examination, or that you may use when answering some of the longer questions like the 8-mark questions. So the second reason why the urban cores have got high population density is due to transport and infrastructure. Now we know that, for example, London has 4 major airports, obviously being London Heathrow, London Stansted, London Gatwick, and London Luton. So internationally, it's very accessible. And then we also know that we have a lot of motorways that are leading into London. We have A roads and so on. So those large cities tend to have very good infrastructure, which then catalyzes economic growth. And as a result of that, TNCs, businesses, people are going to be attracted to those areas. So if we have FDI that is coming in, most of that FDI, which obviously is being given by TNCs, or yes, being invested by TNCs, is going to be in those urban cores, which then generates more employment, leading to what we obviously refer to as the multiplier effect. So that's the second reason why the urban cores are densely populated. The third reason why the urban cores are densely populated is education and healthcare. Now we know that these urban cores tend to have the best education, educational institutions and the best healthcare services. So if we are talking about London, for example, we have a lot of universities, and obviously that is going to attract the younger people into these urban cores. And obviously, when they complete their education or their studies, they are likely then to work in those urban cores. So education is an important thing. And then you also have healthcare services. Now, the best hospitals tend to be in these urban cores, and therefore, people tend to want to live where they would have very good medical care if they needed it. Now, then the fourth reason why these places are densely populated is culture and social life. Now, if we are thinking about the urban cores, we are thinking about diversity in their culture, because if we are talking about international migration, it means that people from different parts of the world are likely to be coming to reside in those urban cores. And as a result of that, there will be that diversity. And we also know, and as we are going to learn later on in the topic of UK's evolving human landscape, that new migrants into a country tend to cluster, well, to move to the urban cores first of all, and then they tend to cluster in certain areas. And the reason they tend to cluster in certain areas in those urban cores is because they would like to live in areas where there are people like them. So people who are from similar ethnic backgrounds. Now, obviously, because they are moving from a different country, they would be a lot more comfortable if they saw people like them in the place where they live. And then those places also tend to have the kind of services that would cater to their needs. So, for example, if they are religious, they are likely to find that there will be either mosques or temples and so on that will cater to their religious beliefs. And then they would also have shops that sell the kind of foods that they eat. But that is for later on. Okay, we are now going to move on to the rural periphery here in the UK. And for our specification, the example that we use is Allerdale, which is a place in Cumbria, so in the northwest of the UK in the Lake District. Now, the characteristics of the rural periphery in the UK include remoteness, they include low population density, and the rural periphery in the UK also has very low economic activity. However, there are both advantages and disadvantages of living in the rural periphery here in the UK. For example, if we are talking about housing, housing will tend to be fairly cheap in the rural periphery. So you will find that some retirees will want to retire to those areas because once they are done with their, their economically active life where they have been working, then they will want a cheaper lifestyle, obviously, because they are not going to be earning as much as they were earning when they were working. And one of the choices is likely to be the rural periphery because the housing is cheap, and also the lifestyle is also, those areas are also quieter. And that brings us to the second benefit. So housing is one, so cheaper housing. And then the second benefit is that there's beautiful scenery in those countryside areas, and there's also a community spirit. The third benefit of living in the rural periphery is that there's a quieter and a cleaner environment. Now, the rural periphery tends to be less polluted in terms of air pollution, water pollution, if you like, and noise pollution as well. So this combination of factors makes these areas quite good, especially for the retirement migration here in the UK. However, there are also negatives to these areas, or limitations to these areas. So one of the first ones that we'll begin with is a lack of jobs. And obviously, because there is not as much economic activity, there will be an availability of jobs, first of all, and the jobs that are available are likely to have low pay. So those jobs are likely to be in the primary sector of industry. And if we are talking primary sector of industry, we are talking about industries such as fishing, farming, and mining. And these are not necessarily very well paid sectors of industry. Now, the other thing we can mention here as well in terms of jobs is that there is likely to be availability of jobs in tourism. But those jobs are likely to be seasonal, meaning that the people living in the rural periphery are likely not to have a steady income. Then the second disadvantage of living in the rural periphery is that there is an aging population. And this is because most of the younger people are likely to move from these rural periphery areas to try and find work in the urban areas, so in the towns and cities. And when that happens, obviously, there's what we refer to in geography as a brain drain from those areas, such that any jobs that would be taken up by people who are younger and well educated cannot be taken up. So that means then that because there is not as much labor to do those types of jobs, then the implication would be that those jobs are likely, or the businesses that would require those skills for those jobs are not likely to invest in those areas. Which then leads us to the third point, and that is a lack of investment by the government, by TNCs, and by businesses. So this then means that the lack of economic activity in those areas is further exacerbated. The fourth challenge of living in the rural periphery is a lack of transport and infrastructure. Now, as we had mentioned earlier, the rural periphery tends to be quite remote. So the transport links there are not that well developed. And we know that if we don't have well developed transport links, it will lead to a lack of investment because no investors want to invest in an area that is inaccessible. And then when it comes to transport links as well, those transport links being insufficient will mean that moving around those areas is going to be fairly expensive. Now, that limitation in the ability to move around then causes what we refer to as rural isolation. And if an area is isolated, then that means that it's not benefiting from any trade or any economic activity that would otherwise take place in that particular area. All right, let's do a very quick recap then. What have we talked about this morning? We have talked about the UK's population density, and we have said that population density refers to how many people live in a square kilometer or in an area, in a specific area, which is normally defined in square kilometers. And we have also said that the UK has areas that are densely populated and areas that are sparsely populated, and that the dense population tends to be in the urban cores, so in the major towns and cities here in the UK. One of the major ones being London, and then we also talked about the northern powerhouse, which is also very important. So a group of 5 cities that also drive the economy of the UK. Then we then went on to talk about Allerdale, which is an example of a rural periphery area in the UK, which has low population density. Okay, thank you very much for joining me in this Drive to School chat and on this journey towards excellent exam results. If there is a topic that you'd like us to discuss on the way to school, please do let me know in the comment section below, and we shall be sure to discuss it one of these fine mornings on our way to school. All the best, and see you again soon. Bye-bye.